The GOP Senate stalwart Lindsey Graham died this week, and there was a lot of debate about how to reckon with his legacy on war and Trump and politics. But we knew what was coming from the left. It was going to be hatred and smears and the celebration of his death. And I think the most outrageous instance of this was from the unhinged lib wine mom, Jennifer Welch, who had some choice words to say about the recently deceased Lindsey Graham.
This drone looks like a big giant black. All right. There's just no other way around it. He is smiling from ear to ear. He is holding the black. Look at how happy Lindsey is.
Well, we know why Lindsey's so happy.
And, you know, he died after he was groping a penis, a black that was made for mass destruction. This is like exactly what he was. There's one photograph that just completely consolidates exactly who he was. He liked, as we all know, you know, the worst kept secret in Washington, D.C. And he liked killing, you know, the biggest war hawk on the planet. And there he is with a black that kills right before he dies.
They're sick freaks, man. This is like beneath contempt. Okay, first of all, I just want to pause. We'll get back to Lindsey Graham in a second. But there's this interesting thing that happens where they project all of their own, when I say they, I mean these kind of deranged, like wine mom, lib types. They project these sort of perverse sexual fantasies onto conservatives all the time, like as if the only reason you would not share their ideological priors is because you're like secretly sort of harboring whatever perverse sexual impulses that they have and like to celebrate. It's a little bit of a weird line of attack. And the other thing is Lindsey Graham's an interesting figure because he's hated kind of by everybody in some ways, all constituencies. The left despises him because he's on the right, and he's a sort of neocon war hawk and so on. MAGA doesn't like him because he's seen as like he's sort of a betrayer or Johnny come lately, or was never really on board and was counter-signaling Trump for a long time. And there was always a question of whether he was a reliable coalition partner. And then the conservative establishment also doesn't like Lindsey Graham because they see him as this craven sort of transactional politician who submitted to Trump and Trumpism and is therefore weak and wasn't willing to stand on principle. And yet, despite the fact that all of these coalitions and constituencies despise Lindsey Graham, he is a man who has continuously accumulated influence and power throughout his career. And I have to, as a pragmatist, sort of respect that, regardless of whatever disagreements I have with the guy. And so I'm wondering, Chris, if you have any insights into how was Lindsey Graham able to accumulate so much power? Like, what was it about this guy that made him such an effective politician?
I think Lindsey Graham was perhaps the last institutionalist in the United States Senate, and he loved the game of politics, and he was willing to play the game wherever it led. And so he, of course, opposed Trump and then adapted to Trump and then figured out how to flatter Trump to advance his policy priorities. And I think he actually had some genuine convictions. He was definitely an interventionist. He had a passion for the America-Israel relationship. He had a hatred for America's Cold War enemies, most notably Russia, and he was a war hawk. And while you and I probably don't agree with Lindsey Graham on those policies, you have to respect the fact that he got it done. And what I think is happening here on both sides is that people can't actually accept that Lindsey Graham was just a very good institutional operator, and they have to construct a fantasy on top of him. And so from the left, it's a psychosexual fantasy, like something you'd see on House of Cards. And from the right, it is a conspiratorial fantasy that he was operating on behalf of a foreign power, or the Ukrainians, or the Israelis, or the neocons. And I think actually it's much simpler. And there's a great quote from Lindsey Graham, a lesson that I learned early on in politics, where he says, when I first got to Congress, I was looking for the they, meaning they who control the world, they who control policy, they who run the machine of politics. And over time, he realized that there was no they. And in fact, it was just this shambolic process of individuals struggling to make decisions in the moment. And that's when it really clicked for him that he could be a player in politics, and that there was really nothing stopping a man who understood the institutions, who had agency, and who used flattery and this kind of courtier mindset to get the job done. And so, look, didn't agree with Lindsey Graham, but especially right after his passing, you have to give him a nod of respect. He was a true player of the game.
Also, the thing I'm learning, which never occurred to me previously, or I just wasn't paying attention to the anecdotes that, float around Washington, everybody loved him interpersonally. He was like this great guy, sort of a raconteur, super fun to have around, a great dinner guest. He could get along with everybody. And I was reminded of this line from Chinatown, okay? The Polanski film, The Great Robert Town. Whores, ugly buildings, and politicians all become respectable over a long enough time.
Of course I'm respectable. I'm old. Politicians, ugly buildings, and whores all get respectable if they last long enough.
Okay, like there's a certain respectability in survival, okay, and just lasting. And like I think there are all these figures, and I have to say, even someone like Pelosi, okay, who obviously I like disagree with a great deal, or even like Mitch McConnell, who's been in the news recently. I don't, as a political matter, I cannot really say just like describe how much I disagree with them on certain like core policy questions, immigration being actually probably chief among them. But I have to say, these all the boomers and these like DC creatures, they get so much hate, and often deservedly so. But I have to sit here and ask, like, these are people who make the gears turn, okay? And without whom, is it fair to say that the whole thing kind of falls apart? In other words, we hate them in some respect, okay? We all kind of like wish for a world. People say this all the time, like, I don't like the politicians. Anybody who's a politician, they have this like disgust, this sort of intuitional disgust of the political creature. But then I go, you know what? Like, maybe we need them. Like you need this type around, because if everybody is just a kind of a rigid ideologue, nothing ever gets done. It all just sort of collapses into infighting. And these people who are the administrators and lubricants of the machine are actually the necessary ingredient. I shouldn't say the necessary ingredient. And I do wonder if we're losing this type, if this type now is kind of becoming an artifact of an older time. And here I am, like, nostalgic for, I don't know what, like this sort of post-war type, maybe. I can't quite countenance this warm feeling I have for someone
for Nancy
like Lindsey
Pelosi.
Graham. I can't.
You've seen the photos. You've seen the photos.
I'm torn, man, because I have to say, he's like the exact figure I would have pointed at and said, like, that's the kind of guy who needs to go. That's the guy who's like in the Republican Party, who Trump exists to kind of eliminate from the system and replace with something else. And I'm going, okay, who is that someone else who takes Lindsey Graham's spot? And I'm like, I don't know, man. Maybe it's okay to have Lindsey Graham around, actually. Maybe with the right leadership and the right kind of ideological North Star that is sort of established by a figure like Trump and like something like MAGA, a type like Lindsey Graham is actually exactly what you need. Am I wrong? Am I just feeling sentimental in the aftermath of this man's passing? I'm like torn. I don't know what to think about.
I think you're going soft. I think you're going soft on the boomers,
okay.
the soft on the swamp creatures. No, I think they are necessary, and I think we're going to. Of course, it's easy to beat up on boomers. It's popular to beat up on boomers, but I actually think after the boomers are gone, we're going to have a different feeling about them as a generation.
Yeah.
And look, Lindsey Graham was the good old boy politician, wheeler dealer, horse trader who made the Senate work, let's say.
Yes.
It's an older archetype of how politics gets done. And if you look generationally, who succeeds someone like Lindsey Graham, I think it's almost certainly going to get worse. And someone else who was in the news this week that represents let's say the transition down to a more Gen X way of doing politics was Marjorie Taylor Greene, who launched a social media reality television show about her.
You all can hate us on your own dime. I think your fake eyelashes are messing up.
You should be prosecuted for crimes against humanity. You belong in prison, Dr. Fauci. The people of this country are what matters.
I won't stop living, I won't stop speaking, and I won't stop fighting. And neither should you.
Right.
And so, actually it can get a lot worse. And while there are many legitimate criticisms of the boomers, it does seem that the next generation of politics as social media kind of audience gathering could be much worse. And we could quickly look back in retrospect and have that grudging admiration for someone like Nancy Pelosi even, or Mitch McConnell or Lindsey Graham. Not that we agree with the policies, but they did seem in their own way to be moderating forces, to protect the institutions to the extent that they could, and to keep the machine running. Again, not in a way that I say we would like, but it's possible moving forward that things will be different.
Yeah, and I mean, this is the interesting question when you're going through this kind of generational turnover in which the institution, as it was sort of constructed and as it was running, was headed in a bad direction. In other words, like the machine that these people were in charge of sort of keeping intact had like gone off the road and was, headed towards the ditch, or was just kind of, going aimlessly into the infinite expanse of like, this desert. It wasn't headed in any kind of good direction. And there needed to be a change at the wheel. Like we needed someone to come in and move the thing around. But you can't throw out at the same time, those pieces, those people who, again, keep that machine running. And also, like, this thing you said about the lack of ego, Lindsey, I'm talking about now Lindsey Graham specifically. I'm thinking of the fact that he's, leaving this earth with very little money. And that's a unique part of his story, is that he never enriched himself at all, ever in office. And he
could have been on the board of every defense company,
of course,
on the planet.
Of course. Yeah. And unlike John McCain, who was his close friend and who was so prideful and so obviously concerned with his like legacy and his ego and the way he was perceived, Lindsey Graham had this kind of willingness to sacrifice his dignity on behalf of the things he believed in. You got the sense that he didn't really care about how people thought about him. He didn't care about his legacy. I remember a quote from Rudy Giuliani, actually. It was in around like 2020, and some reporter asked him, well, why would you sacrifice your legacy as like America's mayor by putting all of your reputation and influence behind Donald Trump? And Giuliani kind of thinks for a moment. He goes, I don't care about my legacy. I don't care because I'll be dead. And what's important is what I can accomplish right now and like do the things I believe in. And there's a kind of wisdom in that I think is often missing from these politicians. They're always thinking about their legacy. How is history going to look at me? And it's like I have this grudging respect for people like Lindsey Graham who just don't seem to care about any of that. So yeah, I'm sitting here, I'm feeling very torn. I'm feeling emotionally conflicted and have since his passing, and find myself very surprised by my own reaction to this, to think, you know what, actually, we might need these guys around, and we're going to miss them when they're gone. So yeah, that's what I want to say about Lindsey Graham. Maybe enough time will pass, and we'll be out of this sort of halo of his passing, and I'll think differently about this. So I'm reserving the right to change my mind completely about this and do a full
Next week we're going to
180,
be ripping
okay?
on Lindsey
Exactly.
Graham. We're going to be
Okay.
ripping on him.
You're not
So
allowed to
one
hold
question
me
for
to
you,
any
though.
of this. Yeah.
I have one question. How do we think about, or how should we think about these rumors and accusations that Lindsey Graham had a secret gay life? Do we ignore them? Do we deal with them? Do we try to weigh the evidence for and against them? This is something that has been all around, and I've never quite known what to think of it. Yeah.
I don't know. Okay, if I'm being totally candid, I don't even like to speculate about this stuff, but if I'm being like totally candid, yeah, he seemed to have like a little bit of a, little light in the loafers, a little sugar in the tank, as they say. But I don't know, man. And I also just think like he might have just lived his life as like a priest, and the Senate was his church, and that's it. And he was committed fully and totally to this thing, and just didn't have these fleshly sort of desires that again, for reasons that I think are a projection of the perversions of the people issuing these speculations. Not everybody's obsessed in this way. Like, not everybody's life sort of revolves around sex and lust and all these things. So I think it's actually totally possible that with Lindsey Graham, what we saw is exactly what there was. There was no double life, nothing like that. He had this, it appears to have this like almost surrogate sort of fatherly patriarchal relationship with his sister and his sister's kids. And that was his family. And that's it. And I just, what is the value beyond a kind of vulgar gossip to even speculate on those points? I mean, does it matter? Frankly, I don't think so. And I haven't seen any evidence for it. So I don't know, man.
Yeah, I think that's probably how I think about it. And look, one way or the other, it doesn't matter. It's just something that, if there's overwhelming evidence or abuse, I mean, in those cases, obviously there's some public interest. But in this case, I think it's kind of cruel. And it's so interesting because in this case, the left is weaponizing these rumors of homosexuality to try to besmirch this individual.
When Lindsey Graham, who now all of these sex workers that he worked with are, NDAs aren't really applicable anymore now that he's dead. Apparently Lindsey, dressed up in his red panties and did gay stuff at night.
While they would be the first people to hang the transgender pride flag in every coffee shop and elementary school classroom in America. And so I find the whole thing very ugly. And I think sometimes on these questions, it's best to just let things be, and doesn't matter one way or the other. And I think Lindsey Graham, look, if you're a critic of Lindsey Graham, there's more than enough to criticize him on politics.
Totally.
And then also, he just died.
Yeah.
And this whole thing, and maybe I'm going soft as well, but even when some kind of liberal icon dies, I have a moment of feeling that person should be respected, honored,
I agree,
and appraised in, at least for a period, appraised in a kind of optimistic and the best light possible.
I agree. The perfect example
that's how I
of this.
approach it, and I just find it so ugly, and the left's true hatred of humanity is expressed in these kind of orgies of celebration and condemnation and slander after people die. I find it so ugly, and we've lost the basic sense of civility, where you just pay your respects, even to an enemy, even to someone who has done you harm personally. You have a moment where you pay your respects and you put down your weapons. Even the mafia knows this. This is kind of the basic thing.
Yeah, no, I agree, and Although it's not a surprise. I mean, I remember I'm going to give you a little Lomez lore moment. It was when I was at UCI, I was teaching and I was with some colleagues, and these were friends of mine, and they had no idea about my politics. And I was, I had my own beliefs, but didn't feel quite as strongly and didn't feel like, oh, well, I can't exist in this environment and this milieu because of the sort of political differences I have with my colleagues. But when Scalia died, we were at a like dinner party. And Scalia dies, and the party there's this conversation that turns to his death, and there's this just effusive celebration of this guy dying. And I just was sitting there like shaking my head. I like almost couldn't believe what I was hearing from them as they were just making so much light and getting so much obvious joy out of this guy's death. And I just thought, I can't be around these people. I cannot coexist or live closely to people who would so sort of brazenly and glibly celebrate a man's death, and a man who'd obviously accomplished so much. Okay, again, like disagree with him all you want. This is a highly accomplished man who has earned respect. Okay, from at least this group of people. I'm absolutely certain of that, if I'm certain of anything. And to just see this, the way that they treated his death and him and his life, just was something that I will never forget. It really was a kind of radicalizing moment. As petty as that might sound to people listening, that showed me, it revealed a lot about the way that they drew these friend-enemy distinctions. This was before I had a clear sort of model of that in my head, that sort of conceptualization of how politics was constructed. And there was no possible way you could ever get anything done with them. It was always going to be this almost existential antagonistic relationship. So
no, it's actually worse than the friend-enemy distinction, because even under a friend-enemy distinction, and if you look historically at great generals or warriors or samurai, whatever it might be, any of the kind of martial traditions, you'd have people who would be fighting wars, who would be fighting in duels, who would be going up against their kind of mortal enemy, and yet have a certain amount of respect. So you look at after the Civil War, even, for example, in the American context, there was a respect even among people who were previously trying to wipe each other out, kill each other, conquer each other. And so this is a kind of passive-aggressive form, celebrating on somebody's grave that is just, it's like beyond even an actual hatred. There's something even more dishonorable about it. It's worse than being a friend or enemy, because you're doing it at a distance where you have nothing to lose, nothing to risk. There's no possibility of response by the other side, and it violates this even deeper human tradition, conviction, or instinct of reverence for the dead. This is a human universal. And so you're violating, I think, something that is deeper than politics, and that's why it's so disgusting. And I think the other layer of it, and perhaps you felt this with your colleagues, is say, you guys are always trying to frame yourselves as such good people who care about human rights, who want to, have love for all of humanity. Right. Love is like, whatever it is. And it's like, no, all of that's fake. Underneath that is a seething hatred for enemies. And I think about people even in my own life that felt that way. It's like these people actually, now that they know my politics, would probably be happy when I die. Your colleagues, if you die, I mean, they're not going to be, oh, he was such a great guy,
It's an interesting moral question. And I'm sure if we were talking to Jonathan Haidt or something, there's some moral foundations sort of component to this where ideology or sort of partisanship is a kind of top layer that's sitting on these underlying moral intuitions and preferences. And it's this weird thing that's weird to us. It's obviously comes very naturally to them, where they will, like you said, they'll apply this kind of very sympathetic humanitarian sort of feelings of forgiveness and to the murderer, rapist, whatever, the sort of abstraction of the horrible villain who's done unconscionable things, but will then sort of displace all of what we would identify as the natural feelings toward that person, which is like a kind of contempt. Like we see that as evil, and they will displace what they see that evil onto these people that are rather close to them. There's a kind of like narcissism of small differences. You happen to feel differently in the way that you like interpret the Constitution. Okay, you're like an originalist. Okay, you're like a descriptivist rather than a prescriptivist, and that is unconscionable to them. That is far worse than like doing the raping and the killing and so on. And yeah, it's like, okay, what do we do with this? How do we reconcile these radically different moral intuitions? I don't know the answer to that. We have these political fights. I guess that's exactly how we do it. We engage in political activism and try to fight each other tooth and nail to try to get ahead. And I guess that's exactly what we're doing.
Yeah, and you have to deny them the right to define kind of who is included in the category of human versus inhuman or subhuman, because that's ultimately what they're doing. Is they have universal concern and care for mankind and particularly the oppressed. But the other group, the oppressor group, is kind of outside of that human circle, and therefore their contempt is justified. Okay, so the other big story this week coming out of New York State was Governor Kathy Hochul signed legislation banning the construction of data centers. And so this is apparently a big moment, and let's listen to what Governor Hochul has to say.
These data centers require millions of gallons of water, straining the local supplies. And when powered by fossil fuels, they drive up our carbon footprint. They occupy massive amounts of land, potentially displacing agricultural space and open spaces. And if you live near one, they emit vibrations and noise ranging from annoying to loud sound that's so loud it's deafening and disruptive to homes and neighborhoods. The bottom line is progress shouldn't arrive with a higher utility bill, deleted water supply, or noise pollution. So we have no choice but to address these challenges created by these massive facilities. That is why today I'll be signing the nation's first ever statewide moratorium on hyperscale data centers.
Does she have like Bell's palsy or something? I'm sorry, I haven't seen Kathy Hochul speak in a while, but she was like slurring her words or something. Okay, I don't know what's wrong with her. I don't want to.
Captain Morgan. Yeah.
Something's going on there. Hope she's okay. Okay, what is this actually about? The data centers are ostensibly, or opposition to data centers are ostensibly about water use or something, like farmland displacement,
vibrations.
Noise,
she said that the centers are vibrating.
Vibrations. That may be actually the only legitimate critique here. Actually, like living next to
the buildings are shaking.
Like,
the buildings are
like there's
buzzing,
this constant. Like low level noise, ambient noise all the time. I can understand that. That actually, like, I'm sympathetic to that. But okay,
they're not building data centers in the middle of suburban neighborhoods.
No, they're not. They're not. Yeah. But I live out. I have to say, I live out in a beautiful rural area, and not in my backyard. Okay, I'm a NIMBY about this.
I'm a NIMBY too. Yeah,
build them somewhere else. Like, I'm not opposed to them, but I don't want to see them. So I'm somewhat sympathetic to like the eyesore aesthetic kind of distaste for these things. But I really don't think that's what any of this is about. Okay, there's something else going on. Data centers are a proxy for something else. Data centers are a proxy now for concerns, these sort of unarticulable concerns about tech and this coming age of AI. And nobody quite knows how to speak about those concerns because they're so abstract, they're so speculative, and perhaps there's some self-understanding amongst the people who have those concerns that it's largely attributable to like superstition. It's a kind of Luddism. And so they then sort of justify that through these other proxy concerns. So one is, I don't think these are real concerns. They're about something else. So what is that something else? Or am I wrong? Are people really like worked up about data centers because they're using too much water?
I don't think so. I mean, let's take the farmland example. I actually looked it up this morning. There's almost 900 million acres of farmland in the United States. And so the data centers are not a threat to small family farms. They're not going to displace agricultural land. And even such, I mean, it's not like New York State is really trying to help the farmers expand their operations. Of course, in places like California, they're trying to drain water from farmers as well. So I think these are all pretextual environmental arguments, and they're doing that because they have a built-in narrative that can convince segments of their voting base that this is bad for the environment. It's bad because of energy, fossil fuels. It's bad because of water consumption. It's bad because of noise pollution. But look, these aren't coal mines. These aren't dangerous industrial facilities. These aren't chemical compound factories. On the large scale of things, data centers are a relatively low impact on the environment. And so you have to believe that it is something else. And I think you're exactly right. This is the anti-tech turn. Mm-hmm. And really what they're trying to do is they're trying to operationalize an anti-tech argument through the wealth tax, through opposition to data centers, and by demonizing the billionaire class. And so this is part of that new left-wing economic meta-narrative that they're trying to unfold, and data centers are becoming one symbol in that fight. The question is, for people who call themselves progressives, they have certain exceptions, and one exception is technological progress. Mm-hmm. And so they believe that, the pride flag represents moral progress, but they have to contradict themselves in the face of technological progress. And so I think it's a fear of artificial intelligence, and most deeply, it's a fear that they're not going to clear the bar. A lot of the people who are either dependents of the left's machine or the middle administrator of the left's machine, they understand that actually Claude Mythos 6.7 in the future is going to be better than them in certain key dimensions of intellectual capacity, knowledge generation, et cetera. So they have to pin the blame on data centers. They have to stop data centers to slow down progress that they feel like is going to leave them behind.
So it's two competing impulses that are like irreconcilable here with the left and with progressives. And the way you frame that has sort of like helped me clarify this. On the one hand, they ought to, and at least in theory and when you hear them talk, at least historically, they are pro-technological progress. Okay, they want nicer things, better things. They want cheaper energy. But what we've learned over the past century plus is that the way to produce progress, efficient progress, is through capitalism, is through wealth accumulation, is by equipping industrious, innovative technologists with money and resources to go act independently and according to their will, and to hire people and produce things according to these market forces that this same left tells us are, manipulative and extractive and ultimately bad, produce bad outcomes. And so they're forced now to make a decision. do we change our mind about the power of capitalism and market forces and the acts and works of great men on the one hand? We can't do that. Or do we change our mind about our sort of preferences for technological development? And I think what we're seeing is them change their minds about their preferences for technological development. And so we're kind of retreating into a sort of Ludditism, into a kind of leftist, populist, anti-tech posture that allows them to preserve their antagonism towards the market. Okay, this is my pet theory.
Yeah, I think that's right. And you can summarize a lot of these arguments as part of the degrowth movement.
Right.
And this is a recurring left-wing idea. It has an environmental component. It has a kind of dystopian future component. And the idea is that economic growth itself has such disastrous negative externalities on the environment, on human population, on this kind of Malthusian calculus over the long term,
right,
that you actually have to bomb the factories, stop the data centers, assassinate the tech CEOs. And this whole argument is really starting to bubble up on the left in a way that we didn't see during the woke years, which were primarily focused on culture and race and gender and identity. And look, while I want to do a victory lap on, at least at the superstructural rhetorical level, defeating a lot of the ideas on woke, are we also, like Lindsey Graham, are we going to get nostalgic about woke when the left-wing degrowthers start bombing data centers? Is this a risk? Is this where we're going?
Because they're also woke. So this is like, I keep
woke,
seeing this
they?
meme. I keep seeing this meme like online. It's like, oh, the DSA, like, they've learned their lesson about woke, and this isn't your 2010s like Me Too, BLM, gay race communism. It's something else. Like, we're focused on like issues that matter, putting food on the table and housing and family formation. It's like, no, they're not. Also, all of those. You also still hate white people. Okay, you want to put us in jail for being
They
white
all have long
and straight.
COVID.
Like, no, that's not true at all. They have not dropped woke. They've completely absorbed woke. So
they're
don't
actually
buy that
still
theory
wearing
at all.
masks. There was a DSA meeting photo that circulated on Twitter this week.
That's giving them way too much credit.
They're still wearing masks from COVID. So yeah, no, they haven't moved on. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, you're right, and I kind of say it in part in jest. It's a question of emphasis. And so they're emphasizing what are going to be populist economic positions, but they haven't actually retreated on any of the other positions. It's just a shuffling of presentation. And the thing is, and this legislation is, I mean, look, data centers are going to get built. They're not going to get built in New York. They're going to get built elsewhere. It's not going to stop. You can't actually stop it in a way, because it is the future. It is a technology that will generate wealth.
I don't know, Chris. Why was that not true for nuclear? Why was that not true for nuclear?
Nuclear is different because nuclear has a kind of complex of fear. If your data center, gets hit with an earthquake or a tsunami, you don't have nuclear fallout. You don't have, data centers are not kind of weapons by another name. I just don't think you can generate the kind of fear that you can with nuclear disaster.
Well, so this is the open question. Is there real, durable political will behind this emerging dissatisfaction with new technology and AI? Because remember, this isn't about data centers. This is about all the things data centers facilitate and kind of represent. And what I want to say here is that we can't let the right off the hook here. There's the left's version of this, but there's an perhaps equally, if not stronger, I don't know if it's stronger, but there is certainly this same impulse is arising on the right, this kind of anti-data center, anti-tech attitude that I think could be really powerful politically, and I think could suppress the build out of this technology if it's allowed to fester, and if there isn't sufficient forces that are brought to bear on pushing back against this, because, you know, there's a kind of populist intuition, like as an industry gets further and further from tangible production, okay, that becomes more abstract in what it is and how it generates wealth. There's a certain amount of suspicion that arises, I think, especially from the right. Okay, the right-wing impulse is to say it's not that like capitalism's bad. What's bad is this kind of fake economy, sort of like financial. You know, the right does this with like financialization. They'll get mad at like people who are doing like derivatives trading, and they'll say like these are synthetic, you know, derivatives products, and they sort of don't understand how these things function. And because it's so abstract, because they can't see it or feel it, because it exists in the realm of abstraction, the next step is then to assume that people are either stealing from them or they are somehow getting screwed. Okay, there's this just sense that like, if I can't see the output, if I can't understand why this is generating wealth, why this is valuable to the market, I must be getting taken for a ride here. Like I'm somehow getting the short end of this stick. And I will say, with data centers and new tech stuff, if I want to like be maximally charitable to this view, it's not altogether without reason. Like maybe they're a little off in the precise things they're worried about, but this idea that enormous amounts of wealth is being generated with very few jobs, even fewer long-lasting jobs, because you build the center and then, you know, it takes 5 people,
it's like 5 guys
to monitor the whole center. Okay, there's no job there, let alone job that creates physical stuff. People are getting just insanely wealthy off of this. There's a huge concentration of wealth, and that wealth is distributed sort of globally, not nationally. So there's a sense that while they have their political will is what's allowing this thing to exist and work and, you know, function in all sorts of ways, they're not getting anything out of it. This was the conversation we were having with Mike Cernovich a couple of weeks ago. Mike made this exact point, and tech has been remiss, I think, in making a clear case for why, like, the average guy, you know, living in Ohio somewhere, wherever, pick your place, is going to benefit from any of this stuff. How does this economy, what people want, okay, what do people want at what bottom, especially young men? They want dignified work that gives them enough to go have families and have what they feel is a dignified, like, middle class life. And if they feel like they can't have dignified work, we could run into some serious problems here. Like, I don't think that's something we can so easily dismiss.
Okay, yeah, I mean, yes, but I think that we're talking about a couple different things that are easy to then kind of project onto data centers as a symbol. But the reality is that red state governors are supply side, pro-business, pro-chamber of commerce. This is how they see the world through that lens, and they're going to welcome data center construction. They're going to welcome development. They're going to bring in the construction of these technologies. And so there will be a place to build them in the United States, and it will be sorted politically. And the anti-data center sentiment on the right is a dissident right sentiment that represents a very small fraction of the overall party and an even smaller percentage of the party's political leaders. And so James Fishback, the bellwether candidate for a lot of these ideas we've been talking about over the last many months, is also now added a data center moratorium to his platform. Yeah. Whereas someone like Ron DeSantis or his likely successor, Byron Donalds, is going to be open for business for a lot of these companies.
Is it true though that this is just a dissident belief? I mean, we got to look at the polling to know, and I have to say I haven't like looked at crosstabs. I know AI attitudes about AI in general, and again, data centers, let's just say, is this
symbol, a concrete
signifier,
symbol.
Right? For this, is negative across the board, and I believe that includes on the right.
What I can say with certainty is that amongst Republican elected officials, You have almost universal support for data centers. And in the Trump administration, our friend David Sachs is running AI policy for the administration, is very pro AI, very pro data centers, very pro kind of technological future. So it does seem like from MAGA to the Chamber of Commerce Republicans to state governors and local elected officials, there is support for the kind of artificial intelligence future. And look, as a political matter, I think the right has to figure out what parts of the emerging power structure in the United States and in the world can we claim as our own? Can we provide a place for in our coalition? And as we've been discussing for a number of episodes, while I would say that someone like Cernovich is right, that they have to actually play politics with the people, with their constituencies, provide benefits that give visual symbols for, you can build a data center, but then provide something for the community. That's like bread and butter politics. You have to do it. I just think that following the left on an anti-technological future is doomed. And one of the things that I like about the right and learned from my old mentor, George Gilder, is actually, no, technology is good. And artificial intelligence, for your particular concern about fake jobs, actually, artificial intelligence is a good way to expose and replace those fake jobs. And so I think on the substance of it, I think that that's actually a solution to this kind of fake bureaucratized jobs rather than adding a problem.
I agree 100%. Like my own personal beliefs here, and I've said this multiple times on this show, and I will continue to say this, like I'm a right-wing futurist. I am a pro-technologist. I am like all in on this. And I have very little reservations about it, actually. Like, I think I went through some period where I sort of doubted whether or not we ought to just go full steam ahead on this. But you have to. The only way out is through here. Okay, that's firstly. We don't have a choice. And I think actually there's going to be tremendous benefits in all sorts of ways. But all right, I looked it up. So right now, the Democrats are polling 61 against or are pessimistic about AI to 39% bullish. The right now is 54 to 46. So right is 54 pro AI, 46 against. So it's kind of neck and neck, all right? But it skews more deeply pessimistic for quote unquote like working class. That's a fake thing also. That's like a lefty fake term. We shouldn't be talking about that. But working class people are more skewed toward anti-AI sentiment. So it's not just a fringe thing. And this is something that the right is going to need to deal with. And the right is going to have to sort of face this perception head on and have good solutions to it, because there is going to be some amount of displacement. And the answer can't be what the answer to coal miners was, which was learn to code. It's just that might be right, by the way. Okay, we have
to tell coal coders learn to coal mine.
Learn to coal mine.
Yeah,
but
that's what we need to do. Yeah.
No, you can't. It's too glib. It's too dismissive. It's too removed from how people understand their careers as not just some incidental like piece of their life narrative that you can just remove and then replace with something else. A guy who grows up with this as his life, a farmer or a coal miner or whatever it is, it's integrated into all the other ways they understand themselves, okay? And you have to be mindful of this fact. You can't just pull them out of that existence and then just place them in a cubicle somewhere and tell them to like start typing on the keyboard or, learn how to prompt, okay, is actually probably going to be the answer to most of these questions. Now, it is in some sense true. You can't lie to them. You don't want to feed them some other kind of fantasy, okay, because there is going to be some kind of generational change in how these people understand themselves and their life ways and so on. There's going to have to be other ways for them to find quote unquote dignified work, but it's going to have to be in a world where AI and where tech is kind of saturated through everything. We're going to have to think about this in the way we think about technology, or electricity. It's just everywhere all the time. We don't fret over whether or not we live on, some people do, whether or not they live on the grid. We all just kind of live on the grid. We're all going to live on the AI grid. Okay, that's what it's going to be like for our grandkids. And that's fine, actually. Okay. And we're just going to have to start learning how to sort of integrate our stories, the ways that we think about who we are and how we live and our values within that context. And it's going to be fine. Okay. I promise it's going to be fine.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, look, these huge economic and technological changes, there's always the, I think, left-wing temptation to say, oh, we're going to help, we're going to put training centers, we're going to have, vocational schools to help people transition. Those are almost always BS. They don't actually work. They never get done. They're a kind of palliative and a false promise. And I think the better way to approach it is to say, at least from the position of commentators, right? If you're a politician, you got to do what you got to do. But a commentary, say, yeah, this will be somewhat disruptive. Certain jobs will not exist in the future. Most people will adapt. Some people will not. That's how the world works. That's how it's always been. That's how it always will be. And the solution is not to drone strike the data centers to stop human progress.
Right.
The solution is to try to have a culture that equips people with the spirit and the knowledge and the capacity to get above the line of replacement over time. Knowing that you live in an imperfect world with tragic conditions and a uneven distribution of talent across the population, and there will be a bottom 10% always. And in fact, you can't design policy to the bottom 10%. It's much better for everyone to design policy for the top 10%. That is a hard argument to make politically, but because we don't have to run for office, we have to just run a podcast. We can say it, and it's the truth.
And I would just add one piece to this. If you are a politician and you do need to say, things to appeal to a voter base who might be resistant to this, it's not only a good tactical strategy, it's also good in and of itself, which is to demonstrate your goodwill by focusing on your citizens, the people who are making the decisions and voting for you over and above the interests of the rest of the world. There's a basic calculus here where you can narrow your circle of concern to the people within your country. Okay. And one obvious way to do this is to limit immigration. Okay, to literally narrow the pool of people over whom you are concerned and over who the pool of people who will benefit from these new technologies and who we are going to ensure make it through this filter. Okay, we're going to take steps to help you pass from how things are now to how things are going to be. We can't do that for everybody, but we can do it for our people. So we're going to focus on immigration over and above. So focus on immigration, focus on our citizens over and above the people in the rest of the world. This is pretty straightforward. It's pretty easy, free advice to tech and to our politicians.
Amazing. And speaking of immigration, we'll wrap up the show with a fun story and a win. We're optimistic. We're practical people. We have a little win to share. So I guess 2 weeks ago, Zoran Mamdani released a map of immigrant neighborhoods in New York City, which was, every third world locale was represented. And one conspicuous absence was the storied, historic neighborhood of Little Italy in New York City. Italian Americans went apoplectic. I had some fiery tweets. Roger Stone had some fiery tweets. Charlie Gasparino, the New York Post, had some fiery tweets. The online Italian was enraged. And we created such a fury of Sopranos memes.
This Mamdani guy, he has to go.
What are you saying, T? I'm saying he needs to disappear. He's a problem.
Permanently? That's right. Make it happen.
You got it.
Godfather references. The threat of concrete shoes for anyone who would disrespect our neighborhood. That Mamdani backed down. And so here is Zoran Mamdani, socialist wonderkind, taking his first L as mayor of New York City.
Hi, Mr. Mayor. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Fine, thank you.
Can you
please address the controversy that has developed over the city's immigrant enclaves list? Do you believe that there are neighborhoods that were left off that list? And if the city plans to add more, which other neighborhoods do you think should be added?
Yeah. So this map was initially created by the prior administration in 2023. And when we inherited it, we added a few additional neighborhoods. It's clearly not an exhaustive list of the more than 200 ethnic communities that call our city home. And we're going to be making additional changes in the future to reflect that. And that includes adding Little Italy to the map. Oh,
Little Italy.
Yeah.
There's nothing little about Little Italy, am I right?
All right. Look, I'm allowing you to indulge in your little petty ethnic grievance against Zoran Mamdani, okay? Look, this is really the Ellis Islanders, fighting back against, what are we going to call this new crop of...
Third worldists.
Yeah, is it third worldists? It's all sorts of things, but they got to be something else. Are these the Hart-Sellerites? Are these the, is this the NGO something? We need a demonym to name these people. I don't know what it is. Listen, because I saw a news clip, and it was like this Italian guy in some local news station, and he's doing your thing. You're all angry on behalf of you're getting red in the face and all heated about this ethnic slight, and then he goes, it's also just they didn't include the Irish, and there's no Jewish enclave either, and I'm sitting there like, oh no, I'm embarrassed. I'm embarrassed on behalf of the Ellis Islanders to be participating in this, okay? Because the real story, Chris, is that what did you think assimilation was? Vibes, essays? Assimilation means that you no longer get an ethnic enclave. Okay, there's no German enclave on this. There's no Dutch enclave on this. You're just a New Yorker now. Okay, and I sense that there's some I don't know, feeling of regret or nostalgia for a simpler time. But isn't this what this was always about?
Yeah, and so of course, and there's an amazing MS Now headline. MS Now, the old MSNBC, wrote an article titled "How MAGA Cynically Created a Moral Panic About Zoran Mamdani and Italian Americans." It goes after me by name, but then it also notes that there was a hint of ironic detachment in Rufo's Enraged tweets. And so, is this identity politics for Italians? No, because we can celebrate it for what it is. We can have that sense of play, ironic detachment. I think Little Italy is still valuable as a symbol of Italian Americans, but it's done in a way that, again, I don't think should be mobilized as your entire identity. I don't think it should be held above your identity as an American. And yes, of course, we can see that assimilation does mean these neighborhoods kind of evaporate over time. And, I grew up going to the kind of equivalent of Little Italy in San Francisco as a kid. And so as a kid, my dad would drive me out there. He would see his buddies. We would get the pink Italian sports page. We would drink espresso. We'd go to our favorite little restaurants. And it was all Italians. And that's kind of gone. It's gotten kind of the Columbus Street Italian enclave has gotten smaller over time. I still think it's valuable. And to me, this is just a very funny situation. And
it is.
We can kind of play, and that's how I think people should think about their identities as kind of hyphenated Americans. You should be proud of them. You should have this kind of fun ethnic rivalries. But ultimately, you should not put your ethnic identity above the national identity. And if you want to do that, you should really go back to where you came from.
Well, you should go back is actually the answer. If I'm looking at this map, okay? There's 3 little Guyana. Why are there 3 little Guyanas? There's a little Yemen, there's a little Palestine, a little Pakistan, a little Senegal. And it's I don't know, man. Maybe just the regular Senegal is fine for you. The regular Guyana is fine. What are we? I have to say, the whole concept of this, I find rather unseemly. Okay, and I get that there are these immigrant communities in New York, and it has always been thus. And so this is just a kind of Americanness of its own. But at the same time, I think, what this demonstrates to me is I do think we are in some sense losing our will and even the purpose of like assimilation. I don't think there's a real attempt here to just kind of become a New Yorker. And the thing about the Ellis Islanders was that a lot of them just went back voluntarily over time.
Yeah.
Like I think over a third, I want to say off the top of my head, eventually went back. And the only ones who stayed behind were the ones who, changed their name from Giuseppe to, Chris or whatever.
Joe.
And Joe, and Moisha and Dovey became Dave. Okay. And that's it. You just kind of become an American. And I worry that this kind of celebration of all of these ethnic differences, it's kind of with their thumb in the eye, I think is a bad sign. Okay. I got to just say.
It is. So, look, identity is a nested phenomenon. So you have multiple identities that are kind of nested in one another. You have to know kind of what the hierarchy looks like. And your country has to have a very clean process and, coercive process of assimilation. And so when my father came to the United States, he went to the Catholic school in Philadelphia. And, if you were caught speaking Italian at the school and all the students were Italian, the nun would come and beat you with a ruler saying, nope, you're not there anymore. You're here. And my job as a leader in the Italian-American Catholic community is to get you ready by the time you finish school to be an American.
Yep.
And we don't have that anymore. And so I don't think that these are... the argument from the left is like, well, we had the first wave, the Anglos, the Dutch, the French, the Swedish, then the second wave, the Ellis Islanders. Now it's the third wave everywhere else. That key difference, there's no imperative to assimilate. And in fact, someone like Zoran Mamdani has the kind of reverse assimilation, which he says the United States needs to assimilate to us.
Yep.
And so that to me is the thing that's dangerous. And so while ultimately we have fun with the Little Italy kind of snafu, we remember the real success of Little Italy was actually getting out of Little Italy. That's the direction of how things need to go.
Agree.
All right, sir. Any closing thoughts? Anything else that you're looking at this week?
No, it's summer, man. It's midsummer. Things are slow. People should get outside, go outside, enjoy the outdoors before all the data centers take over. Okay. It's my suggestion.
Yeah. Go outside, get the fresh air and feel the humming vibrations of all the beautiful Anthropic centers.
That's right.
All right. Well, we will see you next week.
All right, Chris, take care, man. Bye.